The whispers of history often hide in the shadows of power, behind the gilded doors of palaces, in hushed conversations between emperor and confidant. For centuries, the Habsburg dynasty, rulers of an empire so vast it sometimes felt like a world unto itself, leaned heavily on a select few. These advisors, men of sharp minds and even sharper ambitions, shaped the destiny of millions, sometimes for glory, often for despair. They were visionaries and schemers, saints and sinners, pulling strings, whispering in royal ears, and leaving their indelible mark on the unfolding drama of Europe. Their stories, often overlooked by the grand narratives of kings and queens, are bursting with intrigue, ambition, and shocking turns. Dive into the secret lives of the 6 most influential Habsburg advisors, a journey that will reveal just how much the world changed because of a handful of powerful men, their advice, and their monumental impact. Number 1. Friedrich Ferdinand von Beust. The year is 1866. A chill wind sweeps across the fields of Königgrätz, carrying with it the bitter taste of defeat for the Austrian Empire. Prussia, with its modern army and brilliant strategists, has delivered a crushing blow. Emperor Franz Joseph, the young monarch who had dreamed of Austrian dominance, now faced humiliation, and the very real threat of his ancient empire crumbling. His prestige was shattered. His realm felt like a house divided, shaken to its foundations. What do you do when your world has just fallen apart? Franz Joseph surprisingly turned to a man who was not even Austrian, a man who had actually been on the opposing side, a man who had actively worked against Austrian interests for years. This was the moment Friedrich Ferdinand von Beust, the former minister-president of Saxony, stepped onto the Habsburg stage. It was a move that stunned Europe, a desperate gamble by a desperate emperor. Beust, a man with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, found himself in Vienna, tasked with nothing less than saving an empire from oblivion. Beust was born in Dresden, the capital of Saxony, in 1809. His lineage was noble, his upbringing steeped in the diplomatic art. From a young age he displayed an impressive intellect, a quick grasp of complex issues, and a natural charm that could disarm opponents or rally allies. He was a product of the European diplomatic salons, fluent in French and German, comfortable moving among the continent's elite. He began his career in the Saxon civil service, quickly rising through the ranks. His early focus was the preservation of smaller German states against the rising tide of Prussian ambition. He was a champion of a greater Germany that would include Austria, a Germany where Prussia would not dominate. He was, in essence, Metternich's spiritual heir, believing in a balance of power, a careful dance of alliances to prevent any one state from becoming too powerful. This put him squarely in opposition to Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian Iron Chancellor, who sought Prussian hegemony at any cost. For years, Beust was a thorn in Bismarck's side, a vocal critic of Prussian expansionism. He tried to rally the Middle German states against Prussia, a futile effort that ultimately failed. When the Austro-Prussian War erupted in 1866, Saxony, under Beust's guidance, sided with Austria. The defeat at Königgrätz was as much a defeat for Beust's vision of Germany as it was for Austria. He saw his own state occupied by Prussian troops, his political career seemingly at an end. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans for him. Franz Joseph's decision to invite Beust to Vienna was an act of both desperation and genius. He needed a fresh perspective, someone untainted by the failures of the past, someone with a clear view of the complex European chessboard. Beust arrived in October 1866, initially appointed as foreign minister. He quickly proved himself to be exactly what the empire needed: a pragmatist, a visionary, and a ruthless negotiator. His first task was to clean up the mess of the war, settling peace terms with Prussia and their allies. He knew that Austria could not afford another war, not yet. He recognized that the old order where Austria held sway over Germany was gone forever. Bismarck had seen to that. So Beust shifted his focus. If Germany was lost, then Austria must look elsewhere, to the east, to the Balkans, and crucially it must put its own house in order. The internal state of the Habsburg Empire was a catastrophe. After the defeat, nationalist fervor among the Hungarians reached a fever pitch. They saw their chance to break free, or at least gain equal footing. For decades, the empire had been held together by a centralized German-dominated bureaucracy. But this system was failing. Beust, with his outsider's perspective, saw what many within Vienna's elite could not or would not acknowledge. The Hungarians had to be appeased. This led to Beust's defining achievement: the negotiation of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, known as the Ausgleich. This was a radical departure from centuries of Habsburg policy. It transformed the empire into a dual monarchy, granting Hungary significant autonomy. There would be two separate parliaments, two separate governments, one for Austria, one for Hungary, two capitals, Vienna and Budapest, but a shared monarch. Franz Joseph would be Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. Shared foreign policy and shared military. It was a complex, almost Byzantine arrangement, but it was designed to solve the immediate crisis and give the empire a new lease on life. The negotiations were grueling. Beust faced fierce opposition from many Austrian Germans who feared losing their dominant position, and from other nationalities within the empire who felt left out. He had to convince a proud emperor, Franz Joseph, to essentially share power, to humble himself to some extent. Beust, with his diplomatic skill and Franz Joseph's ultimate backing, pushed it through. On June 8, 1867, Franz Joseph was crowned King of Hungary in Budapest, a symbolic act that sealed the compromise. Beust became the first minister-president of the new dual monarchy. Effectively running the empire, he immediately set about liberalizing the Austrian half of the empire. He introduced a new constitution which expanded civil liberties, reduced the power of the church, and allowed for greater parliamentary representation. These were bold moves meant to modernize the empire and prevent further internal unrest. He reformed the army, tried to improve infrastructure, and generally attempted to bring Austria into the modern age. But the compromise, while solving the Hungarian question, created new problems. Other nationalities, particularly the Czechs and Poles, felt betrayed. They too wanted autonomy, and the new structure essentially sidelined their demands. This would become a persistent source of tension, gnawing at the foundations of the dual monarchy for decades to come. In foreign policy, Beust tried to regain some of Austria's lost prestige. He tried to forge new alliances, particularly with France, to counter Prussia's growing power. He even considered a war of revenge against Prussia, aiming to restore Austrian influence in Germany. But France, under Napoleon III, was unstable, and Austria, still recovering from 1866, was not ready for another major conflict. His attempts to build a coalition against Bismarck ultimately failed. Beust was an energetic and ambitious man, always striving for new challenges. But he was an outsider, a Saxon, and many in Vienna resented his influence and his rapid rise. His liberal reforms also alienated conservative elements. Slowly, Franz Joseph began to lose confidence in him, especially as Beust's foreign policy initiatives failed to yield significant results. In 1871, Bismarck unified Germany under Prussian leadership, a final blow to Beust's vision of a German federation. With his dreams shattered and domestic opposition mounting, Beust resigned as minister-president. He was then sent as ambassador to London, a prestigious but less influential posting, effectively sidelined from the center of power. He continued his diplomatic career, later serving as ambassador to Paris, until his retirement in 1882. Friedrich Ferdinand von Beust died in 1886. He was a man who, against all odds, had been called upon to rebuild a shattered empire. He succeeded in securing a 50-year reprieve for the Habsburgs through the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, a complex and controversial solution that undoubtedly prolonged the empire's existence. Was he a cunning opportunist who seized a moment of weakness, or the unlikely savior who bought precious time for a dynasty on the brink? History leaves the judgment to the eye of the beholder, but one thing is certain: without Beust, the Habsburg Empire as it was known might have fractured far sooner, and the map of Europe would look very different indeed. He was an outsider who stepped into the heart of a broken empire and for a time pieced it back together, however imperfectly. Number 2. Count Eduard Taaffe. A man who, instead of solving problems head-on, believed in letting them slowly simmer, hoping they would eventually evaporate. This was the philosophy of Count Eduard Taaffe, who for an astonishing 14 years from 1879 to 1893 served as minister-president of the Austrian half of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. While Beust was the grand architect of the Dual Monarchy, Taaffe was its long-term caretaker, known for his policy of muddling through. He was a pragmatist, a master of compromise, and a charming aristocrat who shared a uniquely personal bond with the Emperor Franz Joseph. Eduard Taaffe was born in 1833 into an ancient Irish-Austrian noble family. The Taafes had served the Habsburgs for generations, earning their titles and estates through loyal service. Young Eduard grew up in the imperial court, a playmate of the future Emperor Franz Joseph. This childhood friendship would prove to be a lifelong advantage. Franz Joseph, known for his rigid adherence to protocol and his solitary nature, always retained a special affection for Taaffe. This bond allowed Taaffe a degree of informality and access that few others enjoyed. Taaffe was intelligent, but unlike some of the intellectual giants of the era, he was not a deep theoretician or an ideological purist. He was more of a politician in the modern sense, pragmatic, flexible, and skilled at building coalitions. He had a natural charm, a quick wit, and a laid-back demeanor that belied his sharp political instincts. He understood people, their motivations, and how to gently nudge them in the desired direction. His early career saw him serving in various provincial administrations, gaining valuable experience in the complex ethnic mosaic of the empire. He held ministerial posts in earlier governments, including Minister of Interior and Minister of Defense, before being appointed Minister-President in 1879. The political landscape he inherited was fraught with tension. The Compromise of 1867 had settled the Hungarian question, but it had ignited nationalist passions among other groups, particularly the Czechs and Bohemians. The German liberals, who had dominated Austrian politics for a period, were increasingly unpopular due to their centralizing policies and their perceived insensitivity to non-German grievances. Taaffe's approach was a stark contrast to the previous more confrontational governments. He famously described his policy as muddling through, or sitting out. He believed that trying to decisively solve every complex national question would only lead to further conflict. Instead, he preferred to manage the tensions, to make small concessions, to delay major decisions, and to avoid grand sweeping reforms that might upset the delicate balance. It was a policy of political procrastination, but it remarkably kept the peace for over a decade. To govern, Taaffe constructed what was known as the Iron Ring coalition. This unlikely alliance brought together conservative German aristocrats, the Polish nobility, and the Czech federalists. The Czechs, who had long demanded greater autonomy for Bohemia, were finally given some concessions, including the use of the Czech language in administration and education. This appeased the Czechs somewhat, but infuriated the German liberals, who felt their dominance slipping away. Taaffe skillfully played these factions against each other, ensuring that no single group could gain too much power. His domestic policies were characterized by a cautious expansion of social welfare programs. He introduced early factory legislation, worker protection laws, and social insurance schemes, anticipating some of the reforms seen later in other European countries. These measures were aimed at alleviating social discontent and building broader support for the government, particularly among the working classes who were increasingly susceptible to socialist ideologies. Under Taaffe, a semblance of stability returned to Austria. The period was marked by economic growth, urban development, and relative peace between the various nationalities, though simmering resentments always remained. He was a master at the art of political horse trading, able to keep his disparate coalition together through a combination of charm concessions and calculated delays. His critics, however, argued that he was merely postponing the inevitable, that his muddling through was a sign of weakness, and that he lacked the courage to address the fundamental issues facing the empire. The most persistent challenge for Taaffe was the language question in Bohemia. The Czech population demanded full language equality with German, a demand fiercely resisted by German speakers. Taaffe, ever the compromiser, tried various solutions, including splitting administrative districts along linguistic lines, but no resolution truly satisfied either side. The issue became a symbol of the empire's inability to fully reconcile its diverse nationalities. Despite his remarkable longevity in office, the political winds eventually shifted. The Iron Ring coalition began to fray. The Czechs, tired of incremental concessions, demanded more. The German nationalists grew increasingly vocal, demanding a stronger German presence. Economic downturns increased social unrest. Emperor Franz Joseph, ever practical, began to feel that Taaffe's policy of muddling through was no longer sufficient. The empire needed more decisive action. In 1893, Taaffe proposed a radical electoral reform that would have significantly expanded the franchise, giving more power to the working classes and non-German nationalities. This was a bridge too far for the conservative elements within his own coalition, and even for the emperor. Facing a loss of support in parliament and from the crown, Taaffe resigned. His 14-year tenure, a record for the Austro-Hungarian era, came to an end. He retired from public life, living out his remaining years quietly. He died in 1895. Count Eduard Taaffe was a fascinating study in political leadership. He was not a grand visionary like Metternich or Kaunitz, nor a revolutionary like Beust. He was a caretaker, a manager, a skilled politician who understood the art of the possible in a highly complex and fragmented empire. His policy of muddling through bought the Habsburgs valuable time, allowing the empire to navigate a turbulent period with relative stability. Was he a cynical genius who understood the limits of what could be achieved, or a symptom of an empire that was slowly but surely losing its ability to truly govern? His legacy remains a subject of debate, a testament to the intricate and often contradictory nature of the Habsburg state. Number 3. Clemens von Metternich. The year is 1815. Europe is exhausted. For over 2 decades, the continent has been consumed by the fires of revolution and war. First the French Revolution, then the relentless campaigns of Napoleon. The very idea of kings and emperors seemed fragile, threatened by the new forces of liberalism and nationalism, unleashed by France. But now Napoleon was defeated, exiled, his empire dismantled. Who would pick up the pieces? Who would redraw the map of Europe and, more importantly, restore order and prevent another cataclysm? The man who stepped forward to orchestrate this monumental task was Clemens Wenzel Nepomuk, Lothar von Metternich, Foreign Minister of Austria. He was not a king or an emperor, but for the next 3 decades, he would be Europe's indispensable anchor, a figure so central to the continent's politics that the era itself would be named after him. Metternich was born in 1773 into an old aristocratic family from the Rhineland, deeply rooted in the Holy Roman Empire. His childhood was privileged, his education thorough, steeped in the Enlightenment ideas of reason and order. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a remarkable talent for diplomacy. He learned to speak several languages fluently and quickly made a name for himself in diplomatic circles. His marriage to Countess Eleanor von Kaunitz, granddaughter of the legendary Chancellor Kaunitz, cemented his position within Austrian high society and connected him to one of the most powerful political families in the empire. His early career saw him serving as ambassador in Dresden, Berlin, and most notably Paris during the height of Napoleon's power. These experiences shaped his worldview. He witnessed firsthand the intoxicating power of revolutionary ideas and the destructive force of Napoleonic ambition. He developed a profound, almost visceral fear of both. He believed that the only way to preserve peace and stability in Europe was through a return to the pre-revolutionary order. Strong monarchies, a balance of power between states, and the suppression of dangerous new ideologies, like liberalism and nationalism. In 1809, as Austria faced repeated defeats at the hands of Napoleon, Metternich was appointed foreign minister. It was a perilous time. Austria had been humbled, its treasury depleted. Metternich's strategy was cautious, even deceptive. He played a double game, seemingly aligning with Napoleon while secretly rebuilding Austria's strength and seeking opportunities to join the anti-French coalition. He even arranged the marriage of Napoleon to Archduchess Marie-Louise, Emperor Franz I's daughter, a deeply unpopular move in Vienna, but one Metternich saw as a strategic necessity. His masterpiece of diplomacy came after Napoleon's disastrous Russian campaign. In 1813, at the Congress of Prague, Metternich famously met with Napoleon, attempting to mediate a peace. When Napoleon refused to compromise, Metternich skillfully maneuvered Austria into joining the Allied coalition, tipping the balance against the French emperor. His astute diplomacy was instrumental in Napoleon's eventual defeat. But it was at the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, that Metternich truly became the undisputed master of European politics. Vienna became the stage for an unprecedented gathering of kings, princes, and diplomats, all vying for influence. Metternich, as host and chief negotiator for Austria, dominated the proceedings. He worked tirelessly, charming, cajoling, and negotiating to redraw the map of Europe and establish a new international order. His guiding principles at Vienna were legitimacy, meaning the restoration of traditional monarchies, and the balance of power, ensuring no single state could again dominate the continent as France had. He largely succeeded. The Congress of Vienna established what became known as the Concert of Europe, a system of alliances and regular conferences designed to maintain peace and suppress revolutionary movements. For the next 3 decades, Europe experienced a period of relative peace. A testament to Metternich's diplomatic genius, however, the Metternich system had a darker side. To maintain the peace, Metternich became the chief proponent of political repression. He saw liberalism and nationalism as existential threats to the multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire and to the established monarchical order across Europe. He implemented a strict system of censorship, police surveillance, and a network of spies. The Carlsbad Decrees, issued in 1819, crushed liberal student movements in Germany, establishing strict controls over universities and the press. He famously stated, "When Paris sneezes, Europe catches cold," reflecting his fear that revolutionary ideas spreading from France would ignite unrest across the continent. His relationship with Emperor Franz I was one of deep trust and collaboration. Franz I, a conservative himself, relied heavily on Metternich's advice, granting him immense power. After Franz I's death in 1835, his successor, Ferdinand I, was intellectually incapacitated. Metternich, along with Count Franz Anton Kollwratz-Liebstinsky, effectively ruled the empire as part of a state conference. This period saw the empire stagnate politically. While Metternich's foreign policy maintained peace, his domestic policies suppressed any form of dissent or reform, creating a pressure cooker of discontent. Criticism of Metternich grew over the years. Liberals and nationalists across Europe saw him as the embodiment of reaction, a stubborn old man clinging to an outdated system. He was seen as the jailer of nations, the stifler of progress, the oppressor of freedom, yet he genuinely believed he was saving Europe from chaos, that only a strong, centralized traditional order could prevent the continent from descending back into the revolutionary turmoil he had witnessed in his youth. The pressure cooker finally exploded in 1848. A wave of revolutions swept across Europe, and Vienna was no exception. Students, workers, and liberals took to the streets demanding reforms. The revolution caught the aging Metternich completely off guard. On March 13, 1848, facing an angry mob and losing the emperor's support, Metternich, who had been a symbol of power for so long, was forced to resign. He fled Vienna in disguise, his system collapsing around him. He spent several years in exile in London and Brussels, observing the revolutions and their aftermath. He returned to Vienna in 1851, a living relic of a bygone era. He still offered advice, though he no longer held formal power. He died in 1859, having witnessed the resurgence of nationalism he so feared, and the beginning of the end for the old European order he had so meticulously crafted. Clemens von Metternich was undeniably one of the most influential figures of the 19th century. He gave Europe a generation of peace after a period of unparalleled conflict, a remarkable achievement. He was a master diplomat, a brilliant strategist, and a tireless worker. But he was also deeply conservative, unwavering in his opposition to change, and responsible for years of political repression that ultimately led to the very explosions he sought to prevent. Was he the indispensable anchor who preserved order, or the stifling hand that choked progress? The debate continues, making him one of history's most fascinating and controversial figures. A man whose legacy is as complex and debated as the very Europe he tried to control. Number 4. Wenzel Anton, Prince of Königsfriedberg. Step into the gilded salons of 18th century Vienna, where powdered wigs and silken gowns were the uniform, and gossip was as potent as diplomacy. Here, amidst the intricate dances of court life, moved a man who defied convention, a man of rigid discipline and cold calculation, who dared to shatter centuries of tradition. This was Wenzel Anton, Prince of Königsfriedberg, the architect of a diplomatic revolution that stunningly reshaped the map of Europe. He served two formidable Habsburg rulers, Empress Maria Theresia and her son, Emperor Joseph II, for an astounding 4 decades. He was a force of nature, a man driven by intellect rather than emotion, whose decisions rippled across the continent. Kaunitz was born in 1711 into an old Bohemian noble family. From an early age, he showed a keen intellect and a meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail. He was known for his eccentricities. He was famously vain, spending hours on his elaborate hairstyle, and was obsessed with cleanliness, even carrying his own soap. He rarely laughed, spoke bluntly, and possessed an almost icy detachment that could put people on edge. He was not a man of warmth or easy charm, but of formidable intellect and unwavering conviction. He embarked on a diplomatic career, serving in various embassies across Europe, including Turin, Brussels, and Paris. These postings gave him an unparalleled understanding of European power dynamic. He quickly impressed Empress Maria Theresia, a remarkable ruler herself who ascended to the throne in 1740. She recognized Kaunitz's strategic brilliance and his unwavering loyalty to the Habsburg state, even if his personality was often prickly. The backdrop to Kaunitz's rise was the War of the Austrian Succession, which saw Maria Theresia lose Silesia, a rich province, to Frederick the Great of Prussia. For Maria Theresia, regaining Silesia became a consuming obsession. This loss fundamentally altered Kaunitz's strategic thinking. He concluded that the traditional alliances of Europe were no longer serving Austria's interests. For centuries, the Habsburgs had viewed France as their primary enemy, constantly warring over territories and influence. But Kaunitz saw a new, more dangerous threat emerging. Prussia, a rising power that was challenging Austria's dominance in Central Europe. This led to Kaunitz's most audacious and revolutionary diplomatic maneuver, the diplomatic revolution of 1756. He proposed an unthinkable alliance. Austria, the traditional enemy, should ally with France, its long-standing adversary, to counter the rising power of Prussia and Great Britain. It was a complete reversal of centuries of foreign policy, a move that stunned every court in Europe. Maria Theresia, despite her initial shock and hesitation, ultimately trusted Kaunitz's judgment and gave him her full backing. The new alliance was sealed, leading directly to the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. This global conflict saw Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden pitted against Prussia and Great Britain. Kaunitz, as Chancellor and Foreign Minister, was at the helm of Austrian diplomacy, coordinating the alliance, formulating strategy, and managing the intricate web of international relations. While Austria did not ultimately regain Silesia, the war solidified its position as a major European power, and the alliance with France held a testament to Kaunitz's vision. Beyond foreign policy, Kaunitz was also a fervent advocate for internal reforms. He believed that for Austria to compete on the European stage, it needed a modernized, centralized state. He oversaw significant administrative, economic, and educational reforms, working closely with Maria Theresia to strengthen the Habsburg monarchy. He championed the arts and sciences, built the magnificent state chancellery, and even had a hand in establishing the world-famous Spanish writing school in Vienna. He was a true statesman dedicated to making Austria a more efficient and powerful nation. His relationship with Maria Theresia was complex but highly effective. She respected his intellect and relied on his counsel, but she was also a strong-willed monarch who would not simply rubber stamp his decisions. Their dynamic was one of intense collaboration, often involving spirited debates but always ending with a unified front. When Joseph II, Maria Theresia's son, ascended to the throne after her death, Kaunitz continued to serve as chancellor. Joseph, known as the enlightened despot, was a restless reformer, often impatient and impetuous. While Joseph respected Kaunitz's experience and wisdom, their relationship was more strained than that with Maria Theresia. Joseph often found Kaunitz too cautious, too traditional, and sometimes resented his long-standing authority. Kaunitz, in turn, often viewed Joseph's radical reforms as reckless and disciplinizing. Despite these tensions, Kaunitz remained a crucial advisor, providing a steady hand amidst Joseph's sometimes chaotic attempts at change. As he aged, Kaunitz became even more of an enigma, a relic of a past era. He lived a life of strict routine, rising early, working tirelessly, and rarely socializing beyond his small inner circle. He continued to advocate for Austrian interests on the European stage, but the political landscape was shifting rapidly. His final years were shadowed by the French Revolution, an event he deeply despised and viewed as a horrifying descent into anarchy. He clung to his old aristocratic values and beliefs, becoming increasingly isolated as the world around him changed. He retired from public service in 1792, just 2 years before his death in 1794. Wenzel Anton, Prince of Königsberg, was a truly Latic figure. He shattered centuries of diplomatic norms, forged unprecedented alliances, and fundamentally reshaped Austria's place in Europe. He was a brilliant strategist, a tireless reformer, and a man utterly devoted to the Habsburg state. Was he a genius who foresaw the future and acted decisively, or a stubborn visionary whose rigid adherence to his own calculations sometimes missed the human element? His legacy as the coachman of Europe stands tall, a testament to his intellect and his unyielding will. A man who, though perhaps unlikable to many, was undeniably invincible to the empire he served for so long. Number 5. Father William Lamormeny. Imagine a shadowy figure, not in the public eye, not leading armies or signing treaties, but whispering in the ear of the most powerful man in Europe. His power was not of the sword or the pen, but of the soul. This was Father William Lamormeny, a quiet Jesuit priest whose relentless religious zeal profoundly influenced Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor, and plunged Central Europe into the unimaginable horrors. Was he a pious man utterly convinced of his righteous cause, or a manipulative force whose unwavering faith led to utter devastation? His story is a chilling reminder of how profound belief, left unchecked, can unleash the darkest impulses of humanity. Lenormand was born in 1570 in Luxembourg, a region steeped in the religious tensions of the Reformation. He joined the Jesuit order, a relatively new but highly influential Catholic society, known for its rigorous intellectual training, its missionary zeal, and its absolute devotion to the Pope and the Catholic Church. Lenormand was a brilliant theologian, deeply committed to the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church's aggressive response to the rise of Protestantism. He was educated in Rome and Prague, becoming a professor of theology and a rector of Jesuit colleges. His path crossed with Ferdinand, Archduke of Inner Austria, in 1621, when Lenormand became Ferdinand's confessor. This was not merely a spiritual role. In the deeply religious court of Ferdinand, the confessor held immense sway. Ferdinand was a devout, almost fanatical Catholic. He believed it was his sacred duty to restore Catholicism to its preeminent position in the Holy Roman Empire, even if it meant using force. Lenormand, with his unwavering conviction and intellectual prowess, became Ferdinand's closest spiritual and moral advisor, shaping his conscience and hardening his resolve. The Holy Roman Empire in the early 17th century was a patchwork of Catholic and Protestant states, held together by a fragile peace. The Peace of Augsburg, 1555, had allowed rulers to choose the religion of their territory. But it was a compromise that satisfied few. Ferdinand, guided by Lenormand, saw this compromise as a betrayal of true faith. He was determined to undo it. Lenormand's influence was most evident in Ferdinand's uncompromising stance during the 30 Years' War, which had begun in 1618. The war, initially a localized conflict in Bohemia, spiraled into a devastating European-wide struggle. Fueled by religious, political, and dynastic ambitions, Lenormand constantly urged Ferdinand to resist any compromises with Protestants, to pursue the war until Catholicism was universally triumphant. He fed Ferdinand's belief that God was on his side, that every victory was divine providence, and that every setback was a test of faith. The most famous example of Lenormand's influence was the Edict of Restitution issued by Ferdinand II in 1629. This decree, seen by many as a direct result of Lenormand's counsel, demanded the return of all church lands secularized by Protestants since 1552. It effectively nullified the Peace of Augsburg and was a massive provocation to Protestant princes throughout the empire. It ended the war just when it seemed it might be winding down, drawing new powers like Sweden into the conflict and extending the agony for decades. Lenormand firmly believed that this was a necessary step to restore God's rightful order, regardless of the human cost. He was part of an unholy trinity at Ferdinand's court alongside Prince Hans Ulrich von Eggenberg, the emperor's chief secular advisor. While Eggenberg handled the political and military logistics, Lenormand provided the moral and spiritual justification for the emperor's hardline policies. He was not directly involved in battlefield decisions, but his constant reinforcement of Ferdinand's religious absolutism ensured that the emperor rarely wavered in his commitment to a total Catholic victory. Lenormand was a master of subtle persuasion. He rarely engaged in public debates or grand pronouncements. Instead, his influence was exerted privately, in the confessional, in quiet conversations, in the emperor's personal study. He carefully controlled access to Ferdinand, ensuring that voices of moderation or compromise were often kept at bay. He had a vast network of Jesuit informants and sympathizers, keeping him informed of dissenting opinions and allowing him to counter them effectively. Even as the war dragged on, bringing unspeakable suffering, famine, and plague to the German lands, Lenormand's conviction remained unshaken. He saw the devastation not as a consequence of Ferdinand's policies, but as God's judgment on a sinful world or a necessary purification before the ultimate triumph of faith. He remained Ferdinand's confessor until the emperor's death in 1637. After Ferdinand II's death, Lamormanie's direct political influence waned, but he continued to teach and write, still believing in the ultimate triumph of the Catholic cause. He saw the war continue under Ferdinand III and eventually the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which effectively ended the 30 Years' War, shattered his dreams of a unified Catholic empire. The treaty formally recognized the religious divisions and greatly reduced the power of the Holy Roman Emperor. Father William Lamormagne died in 1648, the very year the war concluded. He was a man of immense faith and intellect, but his story serves as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked religious zeal in the corridors of power. He was not a warmonger in the traditional sense. He did not command armies or plan battles, yet his unwavering convictions and his intimate access to the emperor's ear made him a profoundly influential, and for many a deeply destructive, force. He personified the uncompromising spirit of the Counter-Reformation, a man whose quiet counsel unleashed unimaginable suffering, leaving a legacy of devastation and a continent forever scarred. Number 6. Gaspar de Guzman, Count Duke of Olivares. The early 17th century was a time of immense change and fierce competition. Among Europe's great powers, Spain, once the undisputed colossus, mistress of a vast global empire, was beginning to show cracks in its formidable facade. Into this challenging era stepped Gaspar de Guzman, Count Duke of Olivares. For over 2 decades, he was the all-powerful prime minister or valido to King Philip IV of Spain. Olivares promised to restore Spain to its former glory, to make it once again the dominant force in Europe. He was a man of boundless ambition, sharp intellect, and an iron will. But his grand vision, combined with an unyielding pride and a refusal to compromise, ultimately presided over a period of Spain's slow, agonizing decline, punctuated by rebellions and crushing defeats. Olivares was born in Rome in 1587, where his father served as the Spanish ambassador. He came from a powerful noble family, the Guzmans, and was steeped in the traditions of the Spanish court. He was highly educated, exceptionally intelligent, and possessed a driving ambition. Unlike many nobles of his time, he was a voracious reader and a patron of the arts, assembling an impressive library. He was also known for his imposing physical presence, his piercing gaze, and a somewhat arrogant demeanor that could alienate as easily as it could impress. His rise to power was swift and calculated. He skillfully cultivated a close relationship with the young Prince Philip, who ascended to the throne as Philip IV in 1621. At the tender age of 16, Philip was more interested in hunting, art, and court entertainment than in the arduous duties of kingship. Olivares, recognizing this, quickly became the king's indispensable confidant, advisor, and effectively his regent. He gained Philip's complete trust, and for the next 22 years he was the true power behind the Spanish throne. Olivares had a grand vision for Spain, captured in his famous phrase, Dios Rei Patria, God, King, and Homeland. He wanted to restore Spain's preeminence to reassert its global dominance. He believed that Spain's decline was due to internal weakness, a lack of unity, and a failure to fully exploit its vast resources. He proposed a series of sweeping reforms aimed at centralizing power, streamlining the bureaucracies, and increasing tax revenues from all parts of the empire, including the semi-autonomous regions like Catalonia and Portugal. His most ambitious policy was the Union of Arms, introduced in 1625. This plan aimed to create a unified army of 140,000 men, with each region of the Spanish Empire contributing soldiers and funds proportionally to its population. This was a radical departure from the existing system, where each region provided its own defense. Olivares believed this would create a more powerful and efficient military, capable of asserting Spanish will across Europe. However, the union of arms was met with fierce resistance, particularly in Catalonia and Portugal, who saw it as an attack on their traditional liberties and a drain on their resources. At the heart of Olivares's foreign policy was a renewed commitment to war, particularly against the Dutch Republic, which had been in revolt against Spain for decades, and France. He believed that only through military victory could Spain reclaim its position as the leading European power. This meant Spain became deeply embroiled in a 30 Years' War, fighting multiple enemies on multiple fronts, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, and later against France, in the Pyrenees. The results were catastrophic. Spain, already burdened by debt from previous wars, found itself stretched thin. The constant demands for money and men fueled widespread resentment. The union of arms, instead of strengthening the empire, ignited the very revolts it was meant to prevent. In 1640, Catalonia rose in rebellion, seeking French protection. In the same year, Portugal, which had been united with Spain since 1580, declared its independence, successfully throwing off Spanish rule. These were devastating blows to Olivares's vision and to Spanish power. Olivares was a man of immense personal discipline. He worked tirelessly, often from dawn until late into the night, juggling the complexities of a global empire. He controlled every aspect of government, often alienating potential allies with his overbearing manner and his refusal to delegate. He gathered around him a loyal circle of supporters, but his arrogance and his habit of making enemies alienated powerful factions within the court. His relationship with Philip IV, initially one of complete trust, began to fray as the military defeats mounted and the empire seemed to be disintegrating. Philip, initially blind to Olivares's faults, became increasingly disillusioned. The court was rife with intrigues against the Count, Duke, fueled by his many enemies and by the growing popular discontent over the endless wars and heavy taxation. By the early 1640s, Spain was exhausted, its economy in tatters, its reputation tarnished. Olivares, once hailed as a savior, was now widely blamed for the empire's woes. His health began to fail under the immense pressure. Philip IV, swayed by the mounting evidence of failure and tired of the constant criticism, finally dismissed Olivares in January 1643. Olivares was exiled to Toro, a town in northern Spain. Stripped of his power and influence, he suffered a mental breakdown likely exacerbated by his profound disappointment and the weight of his failures. He died in 1645 a broken man, believing to the end that he had done his duty and that his policies would eventually be vindicated. Gaspar de Guzman, Count Duke of Olivares, was a colossal figure, a true believer in Spain's destiny. He was a man of grand visions and indefatigable energy, who sought to reverse a tide of decline with force and ambition. Was he a tragic visionary whose grand plans were simply too ambitious for a decaying empire and a fractured continent, or a proud autocrat whose stubborn refusal to adapt led his nation down a path of ruin? His legacy is a complex one, a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the profound impact a single powerful advisor can have on the fate of an entire empire. Number 7. Franz I of Austria. As emperor, not just an advisor, but his personal history profoundly influenced the entire Habsburg political landscape of his era, and was shaped by advisors like Metternich. This final entry in our list is not an advisor in the traditional sense, but the very monarch who more than any other shaped the role of advice and the nature of rule for a pivotal era of the Habsburg dynasty. Franz I of Austria, later Franz II of the Holy Roman Empire until its dissolution, was a man born into a world of enlightened absolutism that was violently shattered by revolution. His deep-seated personal experiences and his unique personality fundamentally dictated the kind of advice he sought, the advisors he trusted, and the policies that would define the Habsburg Empire for nearly half a century. His very being influenced the influence itself. Franz was born in Florence in 1768, the eldest son of Emperor Leopold II. His early life was marked by a strict and somewhat cold upbringing. He was sent to Vienna to be tutored by his uncle, the reigning Emperor Joseph II, a fervent reformer. Joseph, known for his relentless pursuit of rational change, put young Franz through a demanding regimen, hoping to mold him into a liberal and modern ruler. Yet the young Franz, naturally cautious and conservative, found Joseph's radicalism unsettling. These early experiences deeply shaped his worldview. He developed a lifelong distrust of rapid change, abstract ideas, and anything that hinted at revolution. His ascension to the throne in 1792, at the age of 24, thrust him into a whirlwind. Just months earlier, his father had died suddenly, and even more dramatically, the French Revolution had escalated, leading to the execution of his aunt, Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France. This seismic event, the regicide of a reigning monarch, terrified Franz and solidified his conviction that revolution was the ultimate evil, a force that must be crushed at all costs. His reign would be defined by this absolute fear of revolutionary ideas and his unwavering commitment to monarchical legitimacy. For the next 2 decades, Franz found himself in an existential struggle against Napoleonic France. He endured multiple humiliating defeats, saw his capital occupied, his empire shrink, and his family forced into difficult alliances. He was forced to dissolve the ancient Holy Roman Empire in 1806, replacing it with the Austrian Empire, a symbolic end to centuries of Habsburg tradition. He even had to swallow the bitter pill of marrying his daughter, Marie-Louise, to Napoleon Bonaparte himself. These experiences hardened Franz's resolve and intensified his natural caution. He became a master of political survival, understanding that adaptability and patience were sometimes more powerful than military might. This deeply personal history explains why Franz I placed such immense trust in Clemens von Metternich. Franz found in Metternich not a challenging intellectual, but a brilliant pragmatist who shared his core values: an absolute belief in the sanctity of monarchical power, a deep aversion to revolution, and a commitment to maintaining stability through a balance of power. Franz did not seek innovative radical advice. He sought counsel that would preserve the existing order, consolidate his authority, and protect his dynasty from the volatile forces sweeping across Europe. Metternich became, in essence, Franz's alter ego in foreign policy. Franz gave Metternich almost complete control over diplomacy, rarely interfering, trusting Metternich's judgment implicitly. This allowed Metternich to orchestrate the Congress of Vienna and forge the Metternich system of conservative order across Europe. Internally, Franz was equally conservative, favoring a centralized bureaucracy and a strong police state to suppress any liberal or nationalist stirrings. He famously stated, "Govern and change nothing," a motto that perfectly encapsulated his philosophy. Franz was not a matic ruler, nor was he particularly engaging. He was reserved, diligent, and somewhat plodding. He preferred routine and order, meticulously signing documents and overseeing the day-to-day administration. He relied on a network of loyal, rather than brilliant officials who executed his will without questioning his authority. He was the ultimate embodiment of paternalistic absolutism, seeing his subjects as his children whom he protected, but also expected to obey, without question. His family life was somewhat tragic. His son and heir, Ferdinand, was intellectually challenged and physically frail, a source of constant anxiety for Franz and a major reason he entrusted so much power to Metternich, even towards the end of his life. By the time of his death in 1835, Franz I had reigned for 43 years. He had successfully navigated the tempestuous Napoleonic era and presided over a period of relative peace and stability in Europe, largely thanks to Metternich. But his unwavering conservatism and his suppression of any form of political or social change created a deep-seated discontent within his empire. The pressure cooker of nationalism and liberalism held down by Franz's rigid rule, and Metternich's system would ultimately explode in 1848, just 13 years after his death. Franz I was not an advisor, But his personal journey and his deeply ingrained character influenced the advisors he chose and the kind of advice he sought. He preferred loyalty and reliability over innovation, order over progress, and survival over grandeur. His experiences of chaos and revolution made him perhaps the most conservative Habsburg ruler of the modern era, setting a tone for his empire that reverberated for decades. He was a monarch who, through his own life story, became the ultimate embodiment of the era's most powerful counter-revolutionary force, shaping the very nature of advice and power within the vast and complex Habsburg domains.